Hi, Hub community. Rudyard Griffiths here, your publisher and co-founder. A little bit of a conversation today. I've got to convene the management team. Well, here at the Hub, that's me and Sean Speer. Hey, Sean, how's it going?
Yeah, great to connect with you on a big topic for sure.
Yeah, so time to time, we like to talk to our community about things that are going on at the hub that we're seeing that seem new and interesting. Sometimes maybe a little bit scary in terms of the future of news and information. And what we want to talk about today is something called Google AI Overview, and as you're seeing on the screen there, something called Google AI Mode, which are big new features that are debuting on our browsers and are having big impact, Sean, on websites and particularly on the news industry. So why don't we begin by having you explain to the audience, like, what are these things and why do they matter? Why do we need to start paying attention to Google's AI Overview and soon to be debuted AI Mode?
Well, I feel a bit self-conscious talking about these issues with you because you've spent a lot of time thinking about them over the past several weeks. In large part, Rudyard, of course, because the internet in general and Google in particular is the lifeblood of the hub. It's how people can find us, how we reach our audiences. It really is the plumbing, if I can call it that our website runs on, in which we connect with new and different people in Canada and elsewhere around the world. And we've been reading increasingly that plumbing is not as reliable as it once was, not just for news sites, but as you say, all different types of websites. And that's precisely because Google's business model seems to be transitioning from a more passive search function, which presents links that people can draw on to answer whatever their query might be, to now a much more customized response to people's questions that, in effect, draw from the body of knowledge on the internet using artificial intelligence. And that answer, which is, oftentimes comprehensive, drawing from different places, is becoming, if I can call it this, a kind of terminal page for people, which is to say they're not then going on and reading or reviewing the links that the AI used to derive the final answer. They're relying on that answer alone. And that is leading to a pretty precipitous drop in web traffic, as I say, from news to sports and virtually everything in between. And for that reason, of course, it's something that you in particular spent a lot of time in recent weeks trying to understand because of its possible implications for us at the Hub.
Yeah, so just to share some key data points with our audience, because I find this stuff fascinating, and I bet our viewers and listeners will too. Number one, 90% of all kind of search occurs through a single platform, which is Google. So, Sean, they are dominant, in a way that,
Yes.
I don't know, ExxonMobil back in the day probably would have been jealous when it comes to search. And why that matters is that search does all kinds of wonderful things, despite what some of the legacy media might say at time to time. What search does is it sends a lot of traffic to the hub and to other websites. So you
Yes.
stick in a topic and you punch in search, and up until really up until last fall in Canada, you would get a series of links. And because the hub was a news organization and because we were highly ranked, in part because of that, because of how Google assessed our information for credibility and visibility, we would show up high in your search results. And that would drive a lot of
Yes.
traffic to our website. Roughly like 40% of all the traffic on our website comes from something called organic search. Other news outlets, it's even higher, 50, 60%. Well, what's happened, Sean, is that with these AI summaries that are now appearing at the top of your Google kind of window, that search results window that you land on that has a little place where you stick in your search term, when you get that AI summary, this statistic just blew me away, Sean. 60% of all Google searches are now something called zero click. And what that means is that AI summary has given that user what they want. They are not clicking on anything. They are not going anywhere other than that homepage. So I'll pass it over to you to explain like why that really matters and just how steep some of the decline thankfully we're not seeing as much of the hub because we're not quite as reliant in terms of our traffic on this so-called organic search than other outlets. But Sean, the numbers out there internationally that are starting to come in places like the United States, which are a good 6 to 8 months ahead of us in terms of having a lead on us vis-a-vis widespread, ubiquitous access to AI overview in Google. Boy, this is posing a big challenge for a lot of the big news players.
Yeah, that was a great overview. One way I've come to think about it, I don't know if this resonates with you and others listening and watching, but it's like in my mind, Rudyard, it's the difference between going to the library and searching out different books that you draw from to ultimately reach an answer to your question. Versus the librarian handing you the answer, and in a way doing the work that you would have done otherwise, combing through the stacks and stacks of books. That really is what Google's AI function and the other AI platforms that are competing in this new and fast-moving industry are able to offer. And if you're in book publishing, or in our case, web-based publishing, if people aren't going to the stacks anymore, that obviously has significant implications. There's an extraordinary piece today in New York Magazine about the so-called media apocalypse that is stemming from this decline in what are called referrals. That is Google and other search functions pushing people to websites, and the massive rise in, as you say, what are called zero click-throughs. This has immediate implications for web traffic for news organizations and other websites. And if those organizations are dependent on web traffic in order to generate advertising revenue, it means they're not just shrinking the number of eyeballs on those sites. The risk, of course, is that it significantly shrinks revenue. And we're already seeing, Rudyard, this has only been happening for a handful of months or so, maybe slightly longer, and we're already seeing web-based news publishers collapse.
Yeah.
And so, in addition to being inoculated because of some of the different parts of the Hub business, everything from our significant and growing newsletter to our significant and growing presence on podcast platforms. We also just aren't as dependent on web advertising as some of these other sites, but we're still thinking significant, thinking a lot about what this means for us and how we can protect ourselves from the apocalypse.
Find a bunker, some beans, and hunker down with a shotgun. It's not. I mean, it's not. Luckily for us, it's not that bad. But it is fascinating to think what is the response to this, because you're right, Sean. I mean, big websites like the Daily Mail, the eighth largest news website in the English-speaking world, is seeing click-through drop by 50 to 60% when the user is confronted with AI overview versus AI, search without AI. And if this all wasn't like bad and scary enough for a lot of the mainstream press. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to something that I'll flip onto the screen here called AI Mode. So this is a new thing that we've been testing out in the Hub. It's only available in the United States right now. But AI Mode is basically AI overview on steroids. What they're doing, and again, this is like, I got to give it to Google. Like this is brilliant, innovative stuff. They are basically taking the ChatGPT functionality of that prompt, line, and your ability to have like an iterative conversation with the AI, And they are integrating that with the immense power and reach of their real-time search and data collection ability by scraping through websites. And here's what you get. This is an example of a speech that Pierre Poilievre, for those of you over on our podcast channel, you can catch this in video on YouTube. Here's a summary of Pierre Poilievre's speech, if you were interested, that he gave at the Calgary Stampede. We're just showing you the first screen here to give you an idea of what a user would see. And there you have it. All the key points in his speech, nicely summarized from you. Yes, on the other side of the screen, some links out to news sources like CTV, something called All Sides. You can watch the speech on YouTube. All helpful stuff. But the fact is that the click-through rates for those like sidebarred information is half or less of what it would be if this had been a traditional search result and you'd queried Pierre Poilievre's Stampede speech, yes, and you'd seen an article in the Hub that came to the top of the suggested links in Google. So what this effectively does, Sean, is I think it confirms what many of us have suspected and what industry magazines have been writing for a long time, is that Google is making a fundamental, radical change in their business model. They are moving away from an entire multi-decade and wildly successful strategy to own the internet, to basically become the portal to all those millions and millions of websites out there. They were the gateway. It
became a verb.
Yeah,
Google
they became a
verb.
Yeah, they were the golden highway, that
yes,
you drove through the internet on. Now that is all being flipped around by Google. They are going to become the internet's aggregator. They are going to become, the one-stop shop, the single place, the single page, the single site that you go to access under Google AI mode this really powerful combination of AI that will search out hundreds of sites, potentially millions of points of data on the topic that you're querying on, and scrape that data in almost real time. And I'll finish here on this because it's pretty mind-blowing to think for the news industry, if some folks are watching from that group right now or listening to this podcast. Tests by media groups of Google AI mode that is coming to Canada probably in the next number of months and the United States show that it can incorporate into its AI analysis stories that news outlets are publishing when they're testing it within 5 to 10 minutes. So unlike ChatGPT, which is trained on information 12 or 18 months old, this is ChatGPT current, like with the moment, in the moment. Yes. It is, in effect, Sean, news on demand. It is a reporter that's gone out there and synthesized all those facts for you based on your query, including by scraping them off a ton of websites in real time, and then serve that up to you. I think this is a profound change and a profound threat to the traditional kind of news model. What do you think?
Yeah. But I want to turn it back to you because I use the word apocalypse. And if people are hearing your voice on the podcast or seeing your face on the video, you're more upbeat than one might think in the context of a anticipated apocalypse. It prompts the question, why?
You're putting me on the spot here. Look, because I think that the media as we know it has needed disruption. It has needed disruption for the better part of the last decade. And that disruption has been postponed, primarily in Canada by large-scale, massive state subsidies. And basically, Sean, what we've decided was that there was some golden age of media where media owned the entire process from news origination to news dissemination and distribution. And that could and should and would always be the news. And the news itself, the news industry, lobbied government effectively, the previous Liberal government, to shower it now in hundreds of millions of dollars in subsidies to sustain that status quo. And despite, users turning away from it, to going to YouTube, going to TikTok, going to all these other places to consume information created by people who maybe weren't professional journalists, who weren't, trained in journalism schools, but clearly were providing people with information that they wanted and needed. And we froze that. We froze the industry with subsidies in a kind of in stasis, and it wasn't innovating. It was failing, I think, consumers. The trust scores came out. We covered them on the Hub. Less than 37% of people in English-speaking Canada trust the media. If there ever was a sign, Sean, that your product has a problem, I would think that's one of them. So there's a side of me. Look, I'll be honest with you. I have concerns about how this will affect the Hub and how it'll affect the volume of traffic that Google used to send to us. But I guess I'm a little bit excited at the idea that maybe that despite of the subsidies, we are still going to have disruption. We are still going to have legacy media finally forced out of its comfort zone and required to confront what I think will be potentially as monumental for legacy media, the introduction of Google AI mode, as was the loss of classified ads.
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. This is like the media and a lot of the industry voices are still fighting the old war over Google's dominance in digital ad revenue. And I think a key takeaway from our conversation is that in some ways that is the last battle. Google itself has moved on, as you say, by unveiling these new technologies which are going to change the basic parameters of Google's business. And it seems to me that that the Canadian industry hasn't quite caught up to these developments. You mentioned the potential impact on the Hub. It's worth addressing directly. We are, as you say, seeing some effects on our traffic, although not as marked as reports from other sites in Canada and elsewhere in North America. But we're ultimately confident that this process can actually be additive. We ourselves, listeners and viewers have probably noticed, have been experimenting with AI in different forms, including using these types of conversations to, in turn, produce text-based content, whether it's takeaways from conversations with interesting people or even op-ed articles that flow from these types of conversations, leveraging the strengths of artificial intelligence. I guess in sum, if you believe in innovation and you believe in progress, and I think that is really at the heart of how we understand the Hub's business, then there's a lot of unknown here. But in a weird way, that is kind of exciting. Don't get me wrong. I'd rather, I don't like apocalypses generally, but I like change. And in that sense, I think we're excited to see what this all means for the Hub and confident that we're able to adapt. And in a kind of weird way, that may give us a comparative advantage because it's not obvious that others in the industry are as capable of adapting.
Yeah, I mean, if you take AI mode seriously, and the early indications are that its impact will be bigger than AI overview, which is what we currently have, and you agree that the model of the internet for not just news businesses, but all kinds of businesses was to create information that was valuable to people, to attract people primarily through Google to their sites, and then once they were on the sites to monetize them, either by selling ads to their own clients or, interestingly, by getting Google to place ads on your site for you and allowing Google to handle the relationship with the advertiser. I think that business model that was at the core of hundreds of billions of dollars of wealth creation and the blossoming of all kinds of industries, in effect, the progenitor of what we now know as the digital news outlet, is over. Google will no longer be a referral site in the same way that it was before. That is gone. And instead, I guess we're into a new era, a new moment where, as the saying goes, like necessity is the mother of invention. And I'm just like you, Sean. I'm just a little excited to see what human ingenuity is going to come up with when confronted with this. I don't know. You could call it an apocalypse, or you could just call it an epoch-like change, like a watershed moment where attention will always have value. Our listeners, people paying attention to things will be always something other people will pay for. Yes. And I think this growing way of talking about what we do, not as digital advertising, but as being part of an attention economy where our value is to attract attention. And what's exciting about the Hub is that we have, we measure it carefully. We have 200,000 hours of your attention, listeners and viewers, each month on our platform through our podcast, our website, our email newsletter, our YouTube channel. That's doubled year over year, Sean. Yes. Wouldn't that be just a great way for all the media to start thinking? It's not about what's the next government subsidy I can get, or how can I extract more money out of big tech. I think the exciting thing for the news business might be to think, how can I grow the attention of my enterprise? How can I double my total attention across multiple types of platforms and multiple types of format, so what I do continues to have value? And if you do that as a business and you can continue to grow attention, you're solving for things that people want and need, because they're giving you your attention in turn for providing them clearly with something that's of value. That is the virtuous circle. That is the flywheel that I think always should have been underneath our business model. And here in Canada, it has just been almost obliterated by government subsidies, by lobbying on part of the industry. And we've ended up with this underperforming, sclerotic, non-innovative, untrusted, news thing of legacy media that, I don't know, maybe deserves what it's going to get from Google AI mode.
I think that's a brilliant point, Rudyard. We've often spoke, maybe abstractly, about the importance of market signals at the Hub. And one of the ways we drive that market signal is in people allocating their scarce time and attention to us, and having a direct relationship with our audience. In part, it's why we often talk about the Hub as a community. And one of the downsides of subsidies is it broke that relationship for a lot of news outlets in Canada, between how they thought of themselves and the work that they did, the content that they produced, and the audience members that they ostensibly aspired to be in dialogue with. And so the direct relationship that we have, and deepening relationship that we have with our audience, is the best insurance policy against what's happening. And so, as we do oftentimes, I just want to thank our listeners and viewers and readers for coming to our site, for subscribing to our newsletter, for downloading our podcasts, for subscribing to our YouTube page. Whatever happens, Rudyard, in the world of AI and this transition from referral to directly answering queries, however that manifests itself, the one way around it is for people to have a direct and ongoing relationship with us. That's what we're looking to cultivate. Mm-hmm. And hopefully, having done that for 5 years, we'll be better positioned to deal with whatever comes out of the apocalypse than some of our competitors.
Well, Sean, there's no one else I would rather have as my wingman on this crazy flight. You were just talking the other day, like the last 5 years, what's happened, Sean? You summarized the list. It was nuts, the things that have gone on to kind of shake up the news business.
When we launched the Hub, we took for granted certain distribution channels, right? Facebook was going to be a key way to identify and reach audience members. Well, that's gone. Twitter was going to be a reliable way to disseminate our information. That is, for all intents and purposes, broken as a distribution channel. Google then emerged as a key part of of how people found our content, and that now seems under threat. Just as we've kind of think we've got this thing figured out, something new comes at us, and that is both scary, but it's also what makes this fun and the most rewarding thing I've ever been a part of. You often characterize it, Rudyard, as trying to figure out a Rubik's Cube, and now it's like kind of trying to figure out a Rubik's Cube while everything else around you is on fire. But as you say, if I'm going to be in the heat with anyone, I'm glad it's with you and our thousands and thousands of listeners, viewers, and readers across the country.
Yeah, so well said. And how many other businesses and other industries don't get all kinds of stuff thrown at them all the time? Why should the news industry be any different? Why should it get special privileges like state subsidies and protection from competition, protection from foreign ownership? Why shouldn't it similarly, face whatever every mom and pop shop or, small town brewery or whatever out there? The world is always changing. Like, embrace the change, live the change. Otherwise, you're just going to go insane. Thanks, Sean, for catching up. This is an important conversation. I hope our audience has enjoyed it. If you're watching this on our YouTube channel, please subscribe. We would appreciate that. We love YouTube. It's a great way to talk to you all. If you're on our podcast feed and you've listened to this, please leave a review. Let us know what you think of the conversation. We always appreciate your feedback. We read all the reviews carefully. Share the Hub's podcast feed with friends and family. Get all kinds of fantastic shows dropping into it daily now as part of our growing preeminence on podcasting in Canada. The Hub is consistently a top 10 politics podcast on Apple, competing right up there with all the best American and Canadian shows. We couldn't be prouder, and we thank our audience for listening and giving us that coveted spot on Apple. We'll talk to you soon, everybody. Be well. Until next time, bye-bye.